What's the meanest thing your husband ever said to you? Danny is dead. He is never coming back. Even 10 years later, that memory still haunts me. I can hear those words just as if they had just been said moments earlier. We were high school sweethearts, and he was older than me by 2 years. We met when I was a freshman and young love blossomed from first sight. Daniel had a gentle soul, and wouldn't hurt a single fly. He was also very responsible for his age, and was also organized. Not a single curfew was ever broken, and while we attended parties, it was always small-sized among trustworthy friends, and no drugs were ever involved. My parents adored him and saw potential in him, and his parents really enjoyed having me around and frequently invited me to their family functions whenever they came up. I was the only one who ever called him Danny, and even had asked if it was alright to call him that, to which he smiled and replied, "I'll always be your Danny." Danny was in a horrific car crash when I was a junior in late December, where he was T-boned by a truck. Driver was high on drugs and had been drinking, that ran a red light, which ended up plowing him into the light-changing post, and the force of it spun his car to where it easily could have nose-dived into the river if it weren't for a tree that caught the edge of the front end, making the car come to a standstill. He had a shattered jaw, broken collarbone, and a punctured lung. For 2 seemingly long and painstakingly days after his emergency surgery, he was in a coma and placed in ICU. Tubes and wires were everywhere, followed by the sounds of the breathing machine, and the heart monitor and whatever else so-called gizmos they had him hooked up to. The only time I left his side was to go to the bathroom. His mom allowed me to stay the entire time. He was barely recognizable, as his face was 3 times the size it should have been. Bruises and cuts covered him, and of course again the endless supply of wires and tubes. I was never happier when he finally opened his eyes and looked ever at me, tried to smile, followed by a squeeze of my hand. My Danny had made it back to us, and he was going to be alright. After his long recovery had passed, one day he got it in his head that he really wanted to serve the country, and had romanticized the idea of being a hero, and that we would be financially set as he'd be able to afford college. His family wasn't very well off. I, while admired and always thanked veterans for serving, just had a bad feeling about Danny enlisting. For some reason, deep down I knew the day he would leave for training would be the day that my Danny died. Not wanting to be selfish, I communicated to him where I stood with the whole idea, how I had a bad feeling about it, but if this was something he felt that he needed to do, then I'd support him 110%, and would be right here, waiting for him to come home to me. After he dodged a few red flags, he had a metal plate in his jaw, which to my understanding was not something the military would readily accept in a potential soldier. Danny succeeded in enlisting, and before I knew it, we were saying goodbye to each other. After he left, I cried myself to sleep every night, and I couldn't understand why. I just did. I wrote uplifting letters to him daily, and counted down the days for his graduation. The day finally came when we got to attend the ceremony, and we were finally reunited in joyful smiles and tears. It was then that I thought perhaps I was just being paranoid, and that maybe everything would be alright. At least I desperately wanted it to be, yet I had this nagging feeling that he was somehow different. I couldn't put my finger on it and shrugged it off. Fast forward to a few days after he came home after having graduated from advanced individual training. I was overjoyed in having him home. I didn't care that somehow he wasn't Danny, that something was off. The Daniel that came back was short-tempered, he seemed angry at the world, and was no longer organized. His car was constantly full of garbage, his room was a disaster. For the first time we actually got into heated arguments versus calmly talking things out, trusting that the other would be heard and have a turn. Another red flag I had ignored was my dog's reaction to him when he first stepped through the door. My dog had literally bolted from the room that he was in and hid, refusing to have anything to do with him. This was a dog that loved to wiggle her butt and push her nose into the leg calf for attention from visitors. As little time passed by, it became harder and harder to ignore the fact that Danny was no longer, and in the place of him, here I had a man who looked like him, smelled like him, walked like him, talked like him, which made it impossible for me to let go. I had hoped that maybe he just got buried deep down inside, and over time he'd find his way back to me. One day, while he was driving me somewhere, I don't rightly recall exactly where, but we had gotten lost. I tried to get him to ask for directions, and he had snapped at me for it. Taken aback, I fell apart. I finally said, "Who are you? I just want my Danny back. You are hurting me by being like this. I don't understand it." Dead silence had filled the car as he slammed on his brakes, violently pulled over, and looked at me dead in the eye with this sheer coldness that I'd never seen, and he said, "Danny is dead. He is never coming back." He then looked straight ahead, and spun his wheels as he got the car back into the road, causing a car to honk his horn, swerve to miss us. Daniel didn't even flinch and ignored that car completely and kept on driving. I cried and cried all the way back home, and he never apologized or said a single word. Being as I was too loyal and couldn't let him go, I was then subjected to constant verbal abuse and manipulation for the next 2 years, and even still followed through with the wedding that I never should have, all because I kept clinging on to the hope that Danny would come home. I nearly completely lost myself in the process. All of my friends were alienated, I never left the house, and after we had an unexpected child together, he was gone from 7 to 8 a.m. and didn't come back until midnight to 2 a.m. every day. One night around Halloween, he'd announced that he was inviting his best friend's girl of his dreams, the best friends, along with his cousin over to drink and play cards. He had me join them. As he interacted with that girl, I noticed that I saw glimpses of Danny, but only towards her. It finally struck me. I no longer had the ability to bring Danny out, that despite everything I'd done, I just could not make him happy anymore. I then announced to the table that I needed to get up early with my daughter and was going to bed. While in bed, I cried as I felt a huge burden lifting off me, as it was then that I finally was ready to let him go. I knew even while we had a few-month-old daughter together, that it was for the best that we parted ways, that neither her nor I should be subjected to years of unhappy family and constant torture. I grieved for my Danny, not the man that sat downstairs, but I finally was freed. The next morning, he announced to me that he slept with his buddy's girl, and it felt good. I think he was shocked that he collected zero reaction from me. Looking at him with an indifferent face, "Cool beans, I'm glad that you had a good time, Dan." I should note that my folks were gone at the cabin, so we had the house to ourselves, and he did this in their bed. I played along with our routine for a month as I looked into divorce process. I then finally broke it off with him and kicked him out of the house, and never looked back since. No amount of pleading and empty promises was going to change my mind. Fast forward 10 years, looking back at this, I'm so grateful that I had woken up and snapped out of it. I'm in an even better relationship with a wonderful man, who treats me and has treated me so well in ways that I never thought were possible, even after 7 years together. He is also an amazing dad, so good at it that my daughter asked me to get an engraved keychain that says, "Thank you for being the dad you didn't have to be," for Christmas. Less than 3. For those wondering, Daniel finally found a new wife. I like her a lot, she keeps him in line.